At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, without any artificial voices or AI slop. I mean, after all, what's HFY without humanity? My name's the Voice Ogre, and let's begin. The ice groaned, a deep, resonant complaint from the glacier's core.
Steady!
Trekken's low and steady command cut through the rising wind.
Maintain intervals. Ulgar, watch your footing on the starboard edge.
Corporal Nolan Riley ground his teeth, the frozen moisture in his beard cracking with the motion. He glanced back at Ulgar, a hulking form of white fur whose heavy paws found purchase where Nolan's boots threatened to slip. Ahead, Trekken's limbs bent at improbable angles to find silent purchase on the ice, his body flowing over the uneven surface. His slender form wrapped in plates of dark, oak-like hide that shed the blowing snow. Just behind him, Chirum, the squad's pilot, took short, bird-like steps, cocking her head as she scanned the sky. They were traversing an ice bridge, a natural span over a chasm so deep its bottom faded into blue-tinged shadow. Day 2 of their final certification exercise on Cryos, a frozen world the brass charmingly called a variable environment training world. Nolan had other names for it.
That's the spine,
Trekken said, his voice a murmur against the wind. He pointed with a long four-fingered hand toward a jagged line of peaks that clawed at the bruised sky.
We go around. The direct route is suicide. Do you think a little climb is gonna stop us?
Nolan called out, his breath pluming in a thick white cloud. Chirum chirped a dry staccato laugh.
The threat is statistically indefensible. The probability of catastrophic falls is overwhelming. Your mass versus local gravity. Poor odds.
My mass is corn-fed heroism, Chirum,
Nolan retorted.
That is a variable your algorithms overlook.
My algorithms account for terminal velocity.
She shot back.
It is the same for heroes.
Even Ulgar rumbled with a low chuckle, a sound like a glacier calving. The banter was easy, a familiar rhythm, a better defense against the cold than their heated suits. They were Task Force Kilo, a mismatched collection of species forged into a cohesive unit through months of shared misery and near-death experiences. This was their final trial before graduation. The banter cut off as the world trembled. The quake began as a deep, sickening vibration that ran through the soles of Nolan's boots and into his bones. The ice bridge sang a low, resonant note of protest.
Tremor, hold positions!
Trekken commanded. Nolan was at the rear, managing the safety line they'd anchored to the cliff face. He dug the heels of his boots in, leaning back and taking the strain as the others steadied themselves. The shaking intensified, and a network of fractures raced across the bridge's surface. A sudden, terrifying slack developed in the rope. Directly beneath his feet, the ice disintegrated, vanishing. The world tilted, a sickening blur of white and blue. He fell, but only for a moment. The safety line snapped taut, the harness digging brutally into his waist and chest. His descent stopped with a jolt that slammed his jaw shut, swinging him violently. He slammed horizontally into the cliff face. The sound, a wet and sharp crack like stressed timber giving way, was his own leg. A flash of white-hot agony from his left shin overwhelmed his senses. He dangled, gasping, his vision swimming in a nauseous haze.
Nolan!
Ulgar's roar broke through his daze. A massive furred hand and a slender plated one grabbed the line. They hauled him up, the movement sending fresh waves of torment through his shattered limb. He emerged over the chasm's edge and collapsed onto the ice, his leg dangling at a sickeningly unnatural angle. The jagged white end of his tibia protruded from his combat trousers, stained red.
Status!
Trekken knelt beside him, his large, dark eyes still as polished stone, unblinking. Nolan sucked in a ragged breath, the cold air searing his lungs.
Compound fracture. Tibia. Maybe the fibula wanted to come along for the ride.
A new sound pierced the air. A high-pitched, insistent alarm from Churum's wrist comp. She stared at the display. Her feathers, which shimmered with shifting patterns of blue and green like oil on water, flattening against her skull.
Squad leader,
She said, her usually clipped and confident voice wavering.
problem. Big problem.
She turned the display for Trekken to see. A weather schematic showed a massive, swirling vortex of dark red descending on their position.
Flash blizzard, Category 5.
She said, her words coming in rapid bursts.
Our forecast was wrong. The system materialized directly above us. We have minutes.
Trekken looked from the screaming weather display to Nolan's leg. The bone shone wetly against the blood-soaked fabric. Nolan had already pulled the medkit from his belt, his movements jerky with pain and shock.
It is bad, Trekken.
He clenched his jaw, his face pale and slick with sweat despite the freezing temperature.
It's useless. It collapses under my own weight.
The blizzard was a death sentence in the open. Their only hope was a designated emergency shelter, a cave system 12 kilometers away, a hard 4-hour march in good conditions. These were hostile conditions.
We build a sled.
Ulgar said. The statement was a declaration. He was already unspooling high-tensile wire from his pack.
Use our poles, a thermal blanket. We carry him.
Chiram shook her head, her movements sharp and frantic.
Unacceptable. Drag coefficient on a sled on this terrain, plus the added mass, quarters our speed. At best, storm hits in 10 minutes. Temperature drop will be 50 degrees in the first hour. Wind speed, 100 clicks, gusting to 150. Our top speed would carry us only 2 kilometers.
She looked at Trekken.
Carrying him dooms us all.
He comes with us.
Ulgar growled, his array of smaller, simple eyes, dark and glossy, fixed on Trekken.
The doctrine is clear,
Trekken said, the words stark in his throat.
The unit returns whole.
The weather ignores doctrine.
Chiram countered, her voice tight.
Doctrine assumes solvable problems. This is a triage scenario. A choice between 1 casualty and 4.
The wind hammered them, tearing at their clothes and screaming in their ears. The first snowflakes, hard as ceramic grit, struck them. Comms were already failing, the air thick with static. Trekken knelt by Nolan, assessing the wound, the man, the storm. Ulgar stood defiant. Chiram gripped her scanner tightly. She looked at Nolan, who just gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. The human knew.
Jerome is right,
Trekken said, his voice flat. The world had narrowed to the howling wind and the throbbing, relentless agony in his leg. Nolan watched them through a haze of pain as Trekken gave the order. Ulgar looked stunned, a low, wounded sound escaping his throat. Chiram kept her gaze fixed on her wrist comp as if the universe's fate rested on its flickering screen. Trekken spoke, his formal tone fracturing for just a moment.
Nolan, we will mark your position with the emergency beacon. Once the storm passes, we will return with the vehicle.
They all knew a storm like this could last a day or a week. By the time they could get a vehicle up here, there would only be a frozen lump in a uniform to find. They moved with a jerky haste that replaced their usual fluid coordination. They piled their spare supplies next to him. Extra heat packs, all the med gel they carried, 4 days' worth of rations. Enough to give the lie some substance, and for him to die in relative comfort. Ulgar knelt, his massive form blocking the wind. He took his personal thermal cloak, a piece of Ulgrin kit prized for its incredible insulation, and wrapped it around Nolan's shoulders. He clapped Nolan's shoulder. Chiram darted forward, adjusting the settings in the emergency beacon, and then placed a small silver disc from her own kit beside him.
Personal grav assist.
Her voice clipped.
For high G maneuvers. It won't lift you, but it will dampen mass. Maybe it will help.
She then retreated, staring into the swirling snow. Trekken stood before him. For the first time Nolan could remember, The Krytian leader's composure seemed to crack for an instant. He raised a hand in a formal, perfect salute.
Corporal, get going, sir.
Nolan managed, forcing a grin that felt brittle and sharp.
You got a timetable to meet.
Trekon held the salute for a second longer, then turned. The whiteout swallowed him, Ulgar, and Chiram in 3 steps. The wind swallowed their footsteps, leaving only its own howl. The pain in his leg was a constant throb. Alone, on a dying planet in a killer storm with a broken leg and a handful of supplies. This was how it ended. He lay there for a minute, maybe 2, the cold seeping into him. And it'd be easy to close his eyes, to let the peace of the encroaching frost take him. Then another thought, hot and sharp, cut through the numbness. They made the right call. They had done their duty. Now he had to do his. It would prove them right. He would survive. He would walk to that extraction point, and when he got there, he would give them so much hell, they'd wish they'd left him in a volcano. A raw, undomesticated spike of spiteful determination pushed through the shock.
Okay, Riley.
He muttered to the howling wind, his voice hoarse.
It's problem-solving time. First, shelter.
He scanned the area, his vision a blur of snow. Before the fall, he'd noticed a dark slash in the cliff face barely 20 meters away. A rock overhang. Shelter. He crawled. Nolan dragged himself to the overhang, his broken leg leaving a smeared crimson trail on the fresh snow. Each movement was a fresh torment, but he focused on the immediate, one task at a time. He used his multi-tool, setting the blade to vibrate at an ultrasonic frequency, and carved heavy blocks of compressed snow from the drift building up at the shallow cave's mouth. He grunted and sweated, stacking the blocks into a crude wall, sealing himself off from the worst of the blizzard's fury. The exertion sent blood pounding in his ears, but it kept his core temperature up and his mind occupied. Inside his makeshift igloo, the wind dropped to a low moan. He activated 2 heat packs and laid them across his chest, the chemical warmth a small pocket of defiance against the planet's cold. Then, he attended to his leg. In the dim glow of his headlamp, it was a butcher's shop. He cut the trouser leg away, exposing the wound. The bone was stark white against the torn muscle and skin. Infection would kill him faster than the cold. He found his tourniquet and his medkit, and he cinched it high on his thigh, biting down on his glove to stifle a scream as the pressure hit. He poured antiseptic over the wound, the stinging, cleansing fire a welcome distraction from the deeper ache. He took the applicator of med gel, a thick, regenerative goo, and slathered it over the entire mess. Once the gel began to set, forming a seal, he cautiously released the tourniquet. He found the syringe of broad-spectrum antibiotics and painkillers and stabbed it into his thigh. He leaned his head back against the icy rock, his body trembling with exhaustion and the first waves of chemical relief. The pain receded, pulling him back from a roaring inferno into a sullen, banked fire. Outside, the storm raged. Inside his snow cocoon, Nolan Riley took stock. One broken leg, limited food, immobilized. His team was fighting for their lives, marching through the blizzard, weighed down by the memory of leaving him. They made the right call, he thought again.
And I'm gonna make it the right outcome.
He closed his eyes to plan. Every engineer knew that a problem was just an undiscovered solution, and this was one hell of a problem. The march was a punishing ritual. Trekon's long legs scissored through the deepening snow, his strides unerring. Behind him, Cherub navigated, watching her short-range terrain scanner, calling out crevasses and unstable drifts. Ulgar took the rear, his massive form a bulwark against the wind, marching with his head bowed. Only Cherub's clipped directions and the wind's howl punctuated the tense, punishing silence that replaced the easy camaraderie of Task Force Kilo. Ulgar's shoulders were rigid, his pace a punishing rhythm against the snow. He marched, his silence a constant accusation. During a brief halt behind a rock outcropping to let the worst of a gust pass, Shira moved to Trekon's side.
It was the only call,
she said, her voice thin against the gale. She held up her wrist comp, the data glowing in the gloom.
Survival probability with him was less than 1%, and without him it rises to 38%. The numbers are clear.
Trekon stared into the swirling whiteness.
These numbers carry a weight, Jirum.
Guilt is an unproductive emotional response,
she stated, but she dropped her gaze to the scanner.
It serves no purpose.
Its purpose,
Trekon said, his voice low and heavy,
is to remind us of our decisions' cost.
He looked back, though there was only whiteness to see. He had made the logical choice, condemning one to save three. He upheld his duty to the Coalition by sacrificing his duty to his soldier, breaking his unit to preserve it. On his homeworld, Krytia, the concept of the unit, the Krita, was sacred. It was a deeper bond than family, a trust more absolute than faith. To willingly break it, even for logical reasons, was a profound cultural and spiritual failure. He replayed the moment 1,000 times, searching for another path, another option he might have missed. He found only the cold, the hard numbers, and the face of his human engineer, smiling a broken grin as they left him to die. By morning, the blizzard's initial fury had subsided, settling into a sustained, bitter gale. Nolan awoke from a fitful, pain-ridden doze to a world of gray light and aching cold. His leg was a throbbing, swollen disaster. The med gel had sealed the wound, but the bone underneath was a mess of sharp, grinding edges. He was immobile. Without a splint, any attempt to crawl would risk severing an artery or turning the simple fracture into a permanent, crippling injury. The medkit's inflatable splint was a joke, designed for sprains, useless for a leg snapped in half. He needed something rigid, strong, and long. He looked at his pulse rifle, lying beside him in the snow. The Coalition's C9 pulse rifle was a masterpiece of military engineering. A ceramic composite shroud encased in its barrel, lightweight, withstanding incredible heat and stress. The stock was a single piece of reinforced polymer. It was the only source of suitably durable material that he had. Kairos had its own undomesticated fauna. Shadow cats, ice borers, predators that would see a wounded man as an easy meal. He scanned the bleak, wind-swept landscape through the gap in his snow wall. The landscape was still. The certain death of immobility versus the potential threat of a predator. The choice was clear. Mobility won. He fumbled with the rifle's catches and pins, his fingers clumsy and stiff with cold. Using his multi-tool, he field-stripped the weapon, laying out the components on its thermal cloak. The power cell, the firing mechanism, the pulse chamber. He set them aside. He needed the housing. He separated the barrel shroud and the stock. Together, they were just long enough to run from his ankle to his mid-thigh. Now came the hard part. They grabbed his ankle with one hand and his knee with the other. He took a deep, shuddering breath and pulled. A wet, grinding sound echoed in his small shelter, and the world went gray at the edges. He fought the nausea rising in his throat as darkness crept into his vision. When the world solidified, the bones settled back beneath his skin. Working before the swelling got worse, he laid the rifle casing's two halves on either side of his leg. He used strips of thermal tape and wiring stripped from the rifle's guts to lash them into place. He pulled each strap brutally tight, gritting his teeth, his body slick with sweat. He wrapped the splint from ankle to thigh, turning the weapon into a cage for his broken limb. When he finished, he collapsed, panting, his body racked with tremors of exhaustion. The splint was crude, ugly, and agonizingly tight, but it was solid. The splint held his leg immobile. He had traded his weapon for the ability to move. He rested for an hour, drinking the melted snow and eating a quarter of a ration bar. He then packed his meager supplies, dismantled his snow wall, and faced the vast, hostile wilderness. With his arms and his one good leg, he crawled. The extraction point was 60 kilometers away. He measured progress in pain and frozen earth. Nolan fell into a rhythm. He planted both arms forward, dug in, and pulled. Right leg forward, find purchase, push. Drag the useless left leg. Repeat. The rifle splint was a dead weight, but it kept the bone from shifting. Every meter was a victory, every 100 a marathon. The mountains that had looked so close were distant, mocking giants. The sky was a lid of indifferent gray. To ward off despair, he retreated into his own head. He ran engineering calculations, deriving stress tolerances for materials beyond his sight. He mentally redesigned the cooling system for the squad's ground transport. He recited, word for word, long stretches of dialogue from the ancient 20th century action movies he'd memorized as a kid.
Come with me if you want to live,
He grunted, pulling himself over a ridge of ice.
Yippee-ki, motherfucker.
He muttered, the words lost to the wind. He planned his reunion speech. It had to be perfect. The right balance of casual nonchalance and biting sarcasm. They workshopped lines, discarding and refining them.
Did you get lost?
He considered. Too simple.
I was about to file a missing persons report.
Too formal. He'd find the right words. The thought of their faces, Trekon's shock, Olgar's booming relief, Chiram's sputtering disbelief, kept him moving. He almost missed the danger while crossing a patch of smooth, windswept ice when the surface beneath his hands gave way. A hidden crevasse. He slid forward, his good leg kicking uselessly. His reflexes fired. He slammed his shattered leg down, jamming the rifle's splint sharp edge into the ice. The impact shot a fresh wave of agony up his leg, but the metal bit into the surface, holding fast. He dangled for a heart-stopping second, the upper half of his body over a black, bottomless void, before he clawed his way back to solid ground. He lay there for 10 minutes, shaking, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had to place every handhold and foothold with absolute certainty. One mistake meant the end. The planet answered to gravity, heedless of his wit or his grit. The chasm, 100 meters wide and twice as deep, split the glacier before them. The chasm was new, unmapped.
The tremor.
Trekon stated, his voice flat.
It must have opened this.
The same tremor that broke Nolan's leg. It seemed the planet itself was conspiring to make them pay for their choice.
The other side is impassable,
Ulgar rumbled, staring into the abyss.
We must find a route around. It will add a day to our journey.
No.
Chiram said, already unpacking her pilot's survey kit.
Time is too valuable a resource to spend. We go over.
She and Trekon worked in tandem, each anticipating each other's moves. Chiram calculated the trajectory, accounting for wind shear and the chasm's width. Trekon prepared a grappling launcher. A miss would mean losing their only line. Trekon fired. The rocket-propelled grapple screamed across the gap, trailing a thin, strong cable. It soared, then dipped violently in a downdraft. For a moment, Trekon thought it would fall short, but he slammed into the far cliff face, its hardened claws digging into the ice with a distant thunk. He tested the line. It was secure.
I will go first,
Ulgar said.
Anchor the line.
His bulk, a liability in some situations, was an asset here. He clipped his harness to the cable and pulled himself across, hand over hand, his massive form dangling over the deadly drop. He moved with a steady, relentless power, a testament to his species' strength. Chiram followed, then Trekon. The crossing was perilous and slow. The wind tried to tear them from the cable, and the cold leached their strength. As Trekon neared the other side, he glanced back at the path they had taken, and down into the chasm. A sled would have been a death trap, he thought.
It would have killed all of us. I condemned one to save 3.
As he hauled himself onto the far side's solid ice, joining his 2 remaining squad mates, a deeper exhaustion displaced any relief of making it across. They had crossed the chasm, but at a cost in energy they desperately needed. The extraction point felt as distant as ever. Nolan crawled for another day, and then a third. The world became a monotonous cycle of pull, push, drag, and pain. His rations had nearly run out. The cold had settled deep into his bones, and he was beginning to lose time, drifting into fugue states between waking and dreaming. As the third day's light failed, the sky darkened with the familiar bruised purple of an oncoming storm. A squall, smaller than a blizzard, but just as fatal to anyone caught in the open. He was too weak to build another snow shelter. This was it. The line's end. His grand, spiteful plan would fall short. He slumped against a snowdrift, his energy gone. He had failed. And then, a darker patch emerged from the gray gloom, an opening in the base of a colossal glacier wall a few hundred meters away. A cave. The sight jolted him. He found a new reserve of strength and crawled. The last 100 meters were the hardest he'd ever moved. He clawed at the ice, his fingernails breaking, his raw hands leaving bloody prints in the snow. He tumbled into the cave opening just as the storm's first furious gusts hit. He lay on the floor of a wide ice tunnel, sheltered from the wind, panting in the sudden silence. He was safe. For now. He allowed himself the last of his ration packs. The hot, calorie-dense gel, a luxury beyond measure. As he rested, letting the warmth spread through his exhausted body, his multi-tool, clipped to his belt, emitted a faint, rhythmic chirp. He pulled it out. The screen showed the energy sensor was active, picking up a low-level but distinctly artificial energy signature. The signal was a clean wave pattern, repeating in a sequence new to him, separate from background radiation or known coalition tech, and it came from deeper within the cave system. Though exhausted, his engineering curiosity took over. A signal meant technology, a downed probe, a lost piece of equipment, maybe even another shelter. He had to know. He followed the signal. The multi-tool's chirps grew stronger, more insistent, as he dragged himself deeper into the glacier's heart. The tunnel was artificial. The walls too smooth. The ceilings curved too perfect. This was a borehole, melted through the ice by something powerful. The tunnel sloped downward, and after another 100 meters of crawling, it opened into a cavern. Nolan stopped short. The cavern was immense, a vast chamber of ancient, clear ice, and a ship sat perfectly preserved within the ice. The ship was vast, a wedge of matte black, featureless metal whose angles seemed to shift and contradict themselves, refusing to resolve into a stable shape. The hull was dark, unmarked, and inert. Its design was alien, beyond any human or coalition architecture. Glacial pressure had warped and buckled the hull, and on the side nearest him, a massive section was crushed inward, creating a jagged, shadowed opening. The energy signal was pouring from that breach. He crawled toward it, his pain and exhaustion forgotten in the face of the logic-defying structure. He reached the hull, the metal so cold it felt like it was burning through his skin, through his gloves. He pulled himself up and through the breach into the derelict's interior. The air inside was thin and freezing, heavy with the scent of dormant machinery, but breathable. The faint, low hum that vibrated through the deck plates came from a fail-safe atmospheric scrubber still fighting 1,000,000 years of decay. The signal on his multi-tool resolved, pointing down a wide, curving corridor designed for beings that moved differently. He followed it, his headlamp beam cutting a lonely path through the oppressive darkness. Strange, silent equipment filled the chambers he passed, yet the crew and all their personal effects had vanished. The ship felt like a tool set aside, waiting. The hum grew louder. He came to a set of massive blast doors, one of which was bent open by the same force that had breached the hull. He squeezed through the gap and found himself on a catwalk overlooking a chamber so large it felt like it was outdoors. Robotic arms, the size of construction cranes, hung still from the ceiling. Conveyor belts snaked through the forests of silent machinery. Along one wall was a series of what looked like 3D printers, each the size of a small habitat module. The energy source was directly below him, a massive conduit that plunged through the floor, pulsing with a faint blue light. It was a geothermal tap, drilling deep into the planet's core, drawing up limitless energy. This was more than a ship. It was a mobile, automated factory, a self-powered, deep space fabrication facility. Well, Nolan whispered into the cavernous silence, a wide, incredulous grin spreading across his face.
I think I'll call you the Forge.
They made camp in a lee of a massive snowdrift. The squall had passed, leaving behind a fresh layer of powder and the sky full of hard, indifferent stars. Silence settled over them. They were behind schedule and exhausted. The shared trauma of their decision had frayed the bonds between them. Ulgar was cleaning his weapons with a fierce, meticulous strokes, the anger having burned away, leaving a quiet stillness in its place. Trakon stared out at the spine's jagged peaks, his posture rigid.
What do we tell them?
Ulgar asked, his deep voice quiet. He kept his gaze on his work. He meant high command. The inquiry would be brutal. Trakon faced the mountains.
I will tell them the truth, that a catastrophic weather event and an immobilized soldier confronted me. That I made the command decision to sacrifice one to ensure that the rest of the unit survived. They will crucify you,
Ulgar said flatly.
break you down to trooper. Best case. The consequences for my career are a secondary concern.
Trakon replied, his tone as cold as the air.
What matters is the report. It will state that Corporal Riley died in the line of duty. It will also include my formal request for a search and recovery mission to launch the moment that the storm system abates.
Ulgar stopped his cleaning. He looked at his squad leader.
Do you think there is any chance?
No, Trakon said.
But we will recover him from this ice.
Chiram, who was monitoring their power cell levels, looked up.
Agreed. We will preserve his service record. We will honor his memory.
They would carry the guilt and take the official punishment, but they would ensure Nolan's memory endured. Nolan found the Forge's control room, a smaller chamber adjacent to the main bay dominated by a large, dark table for holographic displays. Most systems were dead, but one terminal, tucked into an alcove, glowed with a faint amber light. The script scrolling across it was alien, a series of elegant interlocking geometric shapes, but below it, smaller, simpler symbols were the words, maintenance and diagnostics. He plugged his multi-tool into a data port that looked roughly compatible. The systems connected. The alien computer seemed to recognize his tool as a basic input-output device. The problem was the language. The grammar was inscrutable, the alphabet a mystery. Directly hacking the system was beyond his tool's capability. He had to learn it. He navigated to the logs. The files were simple diagnostic reports from the geothermal tap. Command, response, command, response. Thousands of them accumulated over centuries. Symbol A followed by symbol B results in energy flow increase 0.01%. Symbol A followed by symbol C results in temperature variance query. It was a key. He spent what felt like a full day, huddled in the freezing control room, powered by a single ration bar and a growing sense of manic excitement. He cross-referenced hundreds of logs, using his multi-tool screen to build a rudimentary dictionary. He mapped the alien symbols to his own engineering shorthand. Symbol A was a command prefix, B meant power amplitude, and C signified a query. The puzzle's sharp logic pushed aside the pain in his leg, the cold and the sense of hopelessness. He was an engineer, and this was the greatest machine he had ever encountered. He would make it talk to him. After 22 hours of non-stop work, he had a vocabulary of about 50 words. He was ready for a test. His goal was simple: activate a single, small robotic manipulator in the main bay and make it touch the wall. Proof of concept. He constructed the command string on his multi-tool, translating his intent into the geometric script. Command prefix activate. Unit 77B. Move. X-axis positive 10. He transmitted the command. The result was chaotic. In the cavernous bay, a massive crane arm, the wrong target, jerked violently to life. It swung with a speed that blurred its outline and smashed into a nearby bulkhead with a deafening shriek of tearing metal. Then it went silent again. Nolan stared, his chest tight. Okay, so I have the vocabulary, he muttered to himself, but the grammar remains a mystery. He had just said the equivalent of dog-hungry now wall. The machine had done its best to interpret the nonsense. He needed a safer way to experiment. A sandbox. He spent another 2 hours searching the ship's systems before he found a holographic star chart projector on the bridge, a non-critical system he could afford to break. For the next several hours, the bridge filled with a silent light show as he sent the projector commands, and it responded with chaotic jumbles of stars, distorted schematics, and flashing meaningless symbols. He learned that word order was critical. He discovered that some symbols acted as modifiers, changing the meaning of subsequent words. The system's syntax was based on mathematical operators. He was writing an equation that described the desired outcome as a process entirely different from issuing a command. Then, one command produced a coherent shape. He wrote a new line of code, an equation that described a familiar object in geometric terms. He sent the command. The projector flickered, and a three-dimensional wireframe schematic of a C9 pulse rifle materialized in the air, rotating. Nolan let out a whoop of laughter that echoed in the dead ship. It was his hello world. He now understood the structure, the language. He was ready to design. Using his multi-tool's small display, he sketched out a crude design. A functional leg brace, a powered exoskeleton for a single limb, consisting of a main strut to run parallel to his tibia, a reinforced boot housing, and an articulated joint at the knee and ankle, all connected by bundles of synthetic myomer muscle. He integrated the small grav-assist unit Chiram had left him, its mass-dampening field crucial for offsetting the weight of the alien alloy. For 6 hours, he tapped commands into his multi-tool screen, describing the schematic in the Forge's mathematical language. He described every angle, stress tolerance, and power conduit as a complex geometric proof. Every symbol and operator had to be correct, or the fabricator would produce only scrap metal. Next, he needed raw materials. He had found a storage locker filled with heavy, dark gray ingots of an unknown metallic alloy. They were inert, stable, and incredibly dense. He had to drag one, millimeter by millimeter, over to the largest fabricator's maw. A process that took another hour and left him completely spent. He returned to the control room, his body trembling with a mix of fatigue and adrenaline. This was it. He took a deep breath, uploaded his complex string of code, and initiated the sequence. The Forge, silent for millennia, woke. The low hum in the deck plates deepened into a resonant thrum. Lights flickered to life in the main bay. The robotic arms moved, their massive forms gliding without a sound. Lasers, brilliant and focused, flashed from the ceiling, slicing the metal ingot into workable pieces. The fabricator roared to life, its maw glowing with intense heat. Layer by layer, guided by his code, the ancient machine constructed his design. He had woken the giant, and he'd given it a job to do. The avalanche struck with sudden, overwhelming force. One moment, they were trudging through a narrow pass. The next, the pass filled with a deafening roar of snow and rock. A tidal wave of white poured down the mountainside, burying their path under tons of debris. They were lucky to be on the far side of the pass, but the event blocked their route forward. Though shaken, they were whole, but the avalanche had trapped them. Chiram chirped, her tone grim.
That complicates the timeline.
They spent the next 24 hours digging. The work was brutal, back-breaking, and demoralizing. The snow had packed as hard as concrete and interspersed with massive boulders. Their multi-tools, set to excavate, whined in protest, their power cells draining at an alarming rate. Trekon worked alongside them, his powerful limbs carving out huge chunks of debris. As the hours wore on, a new, colder thought entered his calculations. The avalanche, the chasm. These were new obstacles absent from their training maps. The planet was changing around them. He looked at Ulgar and Chiram, their faces etched with fatigue. They were running on fumes. Even if Nolan had somehow survived the storm, he would have to be in this pass. The avalanche would have buried him instantly. In that pass, any lingering hope Trekon held for his lost soldier was buried under the ice. A grim duty settled in its place. Keep the other two alive. The extraction point felt like a lifetime away. The fabrication process took 8 hours. 8 hours Nolan spent pacing the control room, monitoring the progress on the diagnostic screen and fighting off sleep. When the machine fell silent, he scrambled back to the bay. The result was a rough, angular machine, a testament to function over form. It looked heavy, angular, and dangerous. He dragged it to a charging station, a small alcove with a series of conduits. He found the one that matched the power input he designed and tried to connect it. The conduit was dead. He checked the diagnostics. The geothermal tap was working, pumping out megawatts of power. Millennia of stress and the impact that had grounded the vessel shattered key junctions. Power was flowing from the core, but it failed to reach the fabrication bay's charging stations.
Of course.
Nolan groaned.
It's always something.
He followed the dead conduits, tracing them back to the ship's dark guts until he found the problem. A primary junction box as large as a ground car. A thick armored panel hung open, revealing a melted, blackened tangle of fried circuitry and shattered bus bars. He would have to bypass it. He would have to route power directly from the main geothermal feed. High-stakes electrical repair, working with power levels that could vaporize him if he made a single mistake. He used his multi-tools cutting torch to slice through a section of the main feed's insulation. He could feel the static charge in the air. Using insulated tongs from a nearby toolkit, he attached a heavy bypass cable he'd salvaged from a broken crane. He then connected the other end to the charging station's primary bus, creating a direct, uncontrolled link into the geothermal tap. He flipped the breaker. The cable hummed, and the charging station's indicator light glowed a steady, welcome green. The bypass worked. He spliced a secondary line to a diagnostic port, letting the geothermal giant trickle charge his multi-tool's near-dead power cell. The connection was raw and unstable. The diagnostic showed the exoskeleton's power cell charging at a painfully slow trickle. It would take 12 hours to reach full charge. He had a solution in his hands, but he had to wait to use it. He forced himself to eat the last of his salvaged rations and then curled up in the control room to get a few hours of precious, dreamless sleep. He woke to the beep of his alarm. The charging was complete. He spent the next hour fitting the device to his leg. The cool, heavy alien metal against his uniform. He clamped it over the rifle splint, unable to risk removing the crude support that was the only thing holding the shattered bones in rough alignment. He routed the interface patch to the port of his suit and stood up, leaning on a console for support.
Okay, baby,
He whispered.
let's see what you got.
He sent the mental command to activate. The exoskeleton whirred to life. The myomers tightened, the servos engaged, and the frame took the full weight of his leg. The structural support held. He tried to take a step. The device was inert. He could feel it, powered and humming, but static garbled his commands.
No.
He muttered, running a diagnostic on his multi-tool. He saw the problem in the diagnostic. The power feed from the geothermal tap was raw, dirty power, sufficient for charging cells and running heavy machinery, but filled with enough voltage spikes and harmonic distortions to scramble the interface's delicate calibration. He needed a clean power source, just for a minute, to reinitialize the link. He scanned the control room. Every system was either dead or running off the same dirty feed, except one, the maintenance terminal he'd used to learn the language. Its internal power cell had an isolated supply. Working with painstaking care, he detached the exoskeleton's interface module, a small disk the size of his palm, and jury-rigged a connection to the terminal's power supply. He rebooted it, and the diagnostic signal on his multi-tool smoothed out into a clean sine wave. He ran the calibration sequence he'd designed. It took 3 minutes. He reattached the module to his exoskeleton and held his breath.
Okay, take 2.
He sent the mental command to activate. He took a hesitant step. The myomer muscles contracted, moving his leg for him in a smooth, steady motion. For the first time in days, movement was painless. He took another step, then another. A grin spread across his face. He could walk. He fed more power to the system. His walk became a jog. He moved around the control room, his steps steady and strong. Then he found the command for the grav assist. He activated it. The feeling of his own weight lessened, as if the planet's gravity had been dialed down. The heavy brace felt as light as a feather. He pushed off into a run, seeming to barely touch the floor. He was faster than he had ever been on his own 2 healthy legs. He pulled up his map on his multi-tool. The squad's route, the one Trekon had laid out, was the safe zone. A long, circuitous path around the northern mountain range, the spine. Nolan looked at the map, then at the schematic of the spine's treacherous, icy peaks. With an exoskeleton, he could go straight over it. His goal, which had shifted from survival to defiance, shifted one last time. Now it was about victory. After 6 brutal days of marching, they cleared the final ridge. Below them, stretching out to the horizon, was the extraction plateau. A flat, empty expanse of ice. They had made it.
Beacon is active,
Tiram reported, her voice hoarse with fatigue.
Lander is on schedule. ETA 30 minutes.
A wave of profound, exhausted relief washed over Trekken. They had done it. He had gotten him here. The mission was a success. It was a hollow victory. They trudged the final kilometer to the extraction beacon, their movements slow and heavy. The relief of survival mixed with the heavy memory of their loss. They had succeeded, but they had failed their friend. The ascent was exhilarating. Nolan powered his way up the spine's sheer face, the exoskeleton's claws digging into the ice, its powerful servos propelling him upward. He leapt over crevasses that the squad would have spent hours navigating. He scaled ice walls that would have stopped a full squad. The landscape blurred around him. He reached the summit and continued without pause. The extraction plateau was visible on the other side. He engaged the grav assist to its maximum setting and launched himself down the far slope. He moved in long, controlled glides like a skier, his boots barely touching the ground as he covered miles in minutes. The wind roared past him, a song of speed. He reached the mountain range at the bottom and sprinted across the plateau's flat, open expanse. In the distance, he saw them. 3 small, dark figures trudging wearily toward a blinking beacon. He grinned. It was time. They reached the beacon. Trekon, Ulgar, and Chiram stood together in a tight, silent circle, their backs to the wind, and looked back at the deadly mountains they had just conquered. In the sky, a small, dark dot was growing steadily larger. The lander.
We did it.
Ulgar said, his voice a low rumble.
For him.
Trekon nodded. He was about to say a few words in Nolan's memory, to offer a eulogy to the empty wind, when a voice cut through the air. It was casual, relaxed, and achingly familiar. "Man, I was about to send up a flare. Thought you lost your way." They turned as one. Leaning against a large blue ice boulder about 20 meters away was Nolan. A strange, angular framework of dark metal encased one of his legs. He was sipping from a steaming ration pack, looking for all the world like he'd been waiting for a bus that was running a few minutes late. He looked tired. His face was gaunt, but he was alive. Trekon, Ulgar, and Chiram stared. Ulgar's jaw hung open. Chiram's feathers puffed out, her head tilting in complete bewilderment. Trekon just stood frozen. The logical framework of his universe collapsed. Nolan took another slow sip from his ration pack, then lowered it, raising a single eyebrow at their stunned silence. "It took you long enough." The spell of their exhaustion held for a second longer. Trekon raised a hand, a gesture that stopped Ulgar mid-step. His tactical mind screamed that this was a hallucination, a cruel trick of the light in their shared trauma.
Chiram,
He commanded, his voice a low rasp.
confirm life signs.
Chiram's scanner was already active.
Life signs confirmed.
She chirped, her voice trembling with disbelief.
Human. Vitals are stable. It's him.
The spell broke. Ulgar let out a deafening roar that was half laugh, half sob. He charged forward, closing the distance in 3 massive bounds, and wrapped Nolan in a crushing, fur-covered hug, lifting him clean off the ground.
You son of a grub!
He bellowed, his voice thick with emotion.
You're too stubborn to die!
Chiram was chirping excitedly, a string of rapid-fire, untranslatable Plycan exclamations. She darted forward, her scanner already out, running diagnostics over the strange device on his leg.
Energy signature unstable. The alloy is uncatalogued. Gravimetric distortion is off the charts. Explain.
Trekon walked forward, his gaze fixed on the astounding sight before him. He stopped in front of Nolan, his large, dark eyes tracing the exoskeleton's lines. He looked at the crude lashings, the heavy struts, the faint alien hum it emitted. He looked at Nolan's tired, grinning face. Logic had failed. Doctrine had failed. The numbers were wrong. The immense weight of his command, the guilt he had carried for 6 days, lifted from him into the cold cryo sky. Aboard the ascending lander, the cabin's warmth felt like a dream. The medic had confirmed Nolan's leg, while severely broken, was stable and perfectly set with the strange device. The squad, wrapped in thermal blankets and sipping hot, savory broth, demanded answers.
So,
Trekon began, a deep, resonant wonder clear in his voice.
you will have to explain the leg brace.
It's a prototype, Nolan said with a casual shrug, deflecting Chiram's still scanning device. Found a cave, got lucky with some salvage, put my skills to use. He tapped the metal casing. Still got a few bugs to work out. The inertial dampener's a little, aggressive. Chiram chirped.
Salvage. The alloy composition is uncatalogued in the Coalition database. The power signature is.
I'll put it all in my report. Nolan cut her off with a grin. He looked at his team. At Ulgar, who wore a constant smile. At Chiram, who was practically vibrating with unanswered questions. At Trekon, whose rigid posture had relaxed.
Your solution,
Trekon said, his gaze fixed on the exoskeleton.
was outside predictable parameters.
Yeah, well, Nolan said, leaning his head back against the seat. It's kind of my specialty. Trekon reached out and put a long, 4-fingered hand on Nolan's shoulder. The contact was brief, but firm.
It is good to have the unit whole,
he said. Nolan looked at the faces of his friends, his family. Despite the pain, the cold, and the crawling, he was home. The lander broke through the upper atmosphere, soaring toward the orbiting battleship that waited for them. Below, the frozen, unforgiving surface of Cryos receded, a conquered memory. Task Force Kilo was complete again. And they had one hell of a story to tell.